So there's always this little moment of silence because I want to make sure that it starts to stream. And here it is. So I will be reading chapter 19 from The Phoenix and the Falcon. As I always say, the book is available on Amazon. You can get signed copies from me if you look for collectible. I come up as Pottersville, Catherine in Pottersville. And so we'll see where we go with chapter 19. So it's a good chapter. Introduced a little bit more with Attila. I don't know why I found him so interesting. He's clearly not a good guy. But I saw him as very bright and brilliant person. Chapter 19. As Valamir slept, Helena lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing and the bustle of the camp outside. She shut her eyes against the afternoon sun, seeking the oblivion of sleep, but it eluded her. Finally, she yielded to her restlessness and sat by the fire. Her muscles were stiff, and her right hand throbbed with renewed vigor. She longed to be outside, away from this tent and this camp, astride Pasiel, riding nowhere and everywhere. She disciplined her thoughts. Many times in the past she had found solace by reminding herself of the living words of the prophet Zarathustra. If she closed her eyes, she could pretend that her grandfather was beside her, patiently explaining the nuances behind the teachings. Something unwound in her like a giant coil, and she relaxed. Near dusk, Valamir's eyes opened, and he was instantly alert. He turned toward her, inadvertently placing weight on his self-inflicted wound, and grimaced with pain. Setting loftily religious tenets aside, she found obscure pleasure in his discomfort. A part of her wanted him to suffer for last night. But the memory of his knife slicing his flesh, blood trailing behind its point, was a picture that made her cringe inside. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice muted. As Valamir stood, he grimaced. "No more than I deserve," he said with a shrug. Helena shook her head, annoyed and relieved at the same time. The man she now relied on had returned. Through the walls of the tent, a voice called, "Valamir!" The Goth frowned with irritation. "How long have you been waiting, Ishiite, and what do you want?" "Too long. Attila requests that you and your wife join him for his evening meal. And Valamir, he reminded me twice to call Helena your wife." "Did he? Good. He learns, if slowly," Valamir said with a satisfied smile. "We'll meet you." "Sorry. Orders are to give you an escort." Valamir's voice was a growl. "Why? Why am I sorry? Don't play games with me, Ishiite. He said he wants to see you sooner rather than later. Then you have to wait. I've been sleeping all day. I'll be here." "Good." Valamir turned to Helena, his eyes brilliant in the late afternoon sun. But a frown wrinkled his brow. He spoke in a rush, his voice low. "Attila is like the wind about some things, a stone with others. For no reason he changes his mind. Be careful what you say to him. Doesn't matter that he gave you certain liberties. If he becomes angry, he won't bother to remember his word. If you allow yourself to be provoked by him, he wins." Regretfully, she remembered her conversation with Attila the previous night. "Do you find yourself wanting to tell him everything?" He smiled, shaking his head once. "He has power over people. If your tongue wants to speak when your mind shouts for silence, look away from his eyes. Otherwise he can compel you. And remember, never, ever tell him a lie. He'll know. He can smell your fear." "Impossible. A dog perhaps, but not a human." "He has the ability. I've witnessed it." "Maybe he's just perceptive." "Possibly. But more likely he has a gift, a talent for knowing." He took her hand in his, studying it, then looked at her directly. "You speak too easily from your heart, Helena. In Cansbar's house you were careful, calling little attention to yourself, but you've changed and become reckless. I love your passion, but it puts you in danger. Sometimes I'm afraid where it might lead you." She was quiet, considering his words and recognized truth. With a flash, Grilia's sword had obliterated her world. As she retrieved the fragments of her life, She had abandoned caution. With Cansbar, she'd been passive, knowing submission was the best defense. That diffidence was dust, grit under her feet. The door to her past and her youth was sealed, the key buried. Dangerous or not, she endured in a more elemental form. Thoughtfully, she ran her fingers through her hair. I don't think Attila would harm me. He studies me, always provoking my opinion. The one God knows I've been offensive. If Attila wanted me dead, he has not lacked excuses. I'll be more careful, not for him, but for you. I don't want you to worry. She straightened her dress, ran her eyes over Valamir's tunic, and frowned at a splotch of dried blood. You should change. He smiled, but his eyes were clouded with worry. Just remember, his temper has overridden a judgment more than once. If he hurt you, I have to punish him. Despite his flaws, he is my friend. I don't want to lose him. He pointed to his bloody tunic with amusement. If you think I could hide this from him, you dream. His eyes and ears surround us all. She was vehement. I don't like being spied on. He frowned and then shrugged. Some things I can alter, many I cannot. My people have survived the Huns' domination for 50 years. But as time passes, they become more like us, adapting to our traditions. Each change is a victory for the Goths. I believe that one day Attila will be king. Then the winds will blow more gently for my people. She was silent. She felt rootless and alone, not wanting a future which included Attila. But Valamir was inexorably linked to him, and she could not imagine life without the tall Goth, without the sight of his slow smile, without the warmth of his arms around her. She wondered what her grandfather would think. We must go, she said, running from her quandary. He stood, extending his hand. Without hesitation, she reached for him. As he pulled her close, the sense of oneness, of union, returned. His lips met hers, igniting her body. Her universe became small, allowing room only for his kiss and his hands on her body. Valamir, Ishiite called. His voice had become impatient. They went outside with Valamir's hand clasped over hers. Ishiite, flanked with an escort of 4 Huns, glared with irritation. Valamir was unaffected. I'll need my horse. He was behind the tent. Time passes, Valamir. Helena snorted and plunged forward, dragging a slightly built... Helena doesn't snort. Hassan snorted and plunged forward, dragging a slightly built Hun in his wake. The stallion's ears were laid back, his foreleg pawed the ground. Valamir laughed, enjoying the sight of the man's scrambling dance as he tried to keep clear of Hassan's hoofs. A moment, Ishiite. I'll get my tack, he said, darting back into his tent. Ishiite regarded Helena speculatively, without overt sexuality. The other Huns shared his curiosity. Uncomfortable with their attention, she shifted her weight imperceptibly from side to side. Yet she understood their interest. She was a novelty, as the woman Valamir had married. Unlike Attila, they were easy to ignore. In contrast, their leader upbraided her defenses, reminded her of a wolf circling another's prey. Valamir returned, carrying Hassan's saddle and bridle over his left arm. Without a word, he had the roan ready in moments. With a quick jerk of his head, he gestured to Helena to join him. Once mounted, she was careful not to put any pressure on his wound. She leaned slightly forward and balanced herself by gripping Hassan's mane with her left hand. Her right hand throbbed with renewed intensity. With half of their escort in front, setting a quick pace at a gallop, the rest pressed from the rear. The rows of tents flew by, and the people's faces were a blur. Too quickly for Helena, they reached Attila's quarters. As they arrived, the guards at the perimeter of the tent sprang to something resembling attention. Those who stood straightened their backs. The others on horseback took care that their mounts stood with their heads up and all 4 hoofs square on the ground. As Ishiite passed, the men bowed their heads. Again thinking of his bandages, Helena dismounted first, forestalling Valamir's help. Instantly he was beside her, his hand at the small of her back. The red-haired Gaul emerged from behind the large tent, ready for Hassan. With a curt nod, Valamir acknowledged him. The roan stallion swished his tail and allowed the slave to lead him on a loose rein. With a small, wry smile, Helena contrasted Hassan's recent performance with the Hun. Before Ishite could announce them, Valamir led the way into the tent. Attila looked up from his study of maps, feigning surprise. But Helena was not deceived by his performance. He must have heard the horse's hoofbeats. The treasure of the recent campaign was behind him. Much of it had been her grandfather's. Valamir, silent, glowered at his leader. Attila ignored his rudeness. "You've come. Good. Share food with me. We've much to discuss." Valamir remained by the open doorway, his tacit insolence making Helena uneasy. Worried about what Attila might do, she edged closer as if to shield Valamir. Attila's face was quizzical, but without humor. "What ails you, friend?" "This is a meeting between men. The other war leaders leave their women in their tents. Why do you call for my wife?" Valamir asked, his voice calm, without fear. "I need her. Her hand is useless. She can't write. That is a loss, but my interest reaches beyond her abilities as a scribe." "What are you saying, Attila?" Valamir's tone was just short of belligerent. The Hun began to pace the tent, his hands clasped behind his back. "She's civilization. She observes, she thinks, she forms an opinion, and through her, I learn more of the empire and its vulnerability, Valamir. The underbelly of the world is soft and ripe for our taking. In time, everyone will understand the lessons I shall exact." His words sent chills down her spine. She was afraid, not so much for herself, but for humanity. His appetite for power was unquenchable, born first from revenge, then inflamed by ambition. Valamir shrugged his shoulders, unperturbed. He guided Helena to a place near the fire. "We're happy to break bread with you." Attila sat across from them and leaned closer, his glittering eyes fixed on Helena. His face was flushed. He tore into his meat with large, strong teeth, like a wolf devouring its kill. "Are you pleased with my plan?" he asked. Taking a moment to collect her thoughts, Helena studied the food. As usual, Attila's meal was different. His meat was almost raw. His drink was thin milk, perhaps from a mare. "I don't know what you want, Attila," she replied. "Will you be another Alexander, spreading the best of Greece, or will you bring ruin?" He smiled with pleasure at the challenge in her questions. "I shall be the scourge of God." "Why?" "The world needs cleansing. Men are soft and decadent, seeking only pleasure. They have become women." "What of Alaric? He was strong," Helena asked, thinking of the Visigoth king who had been intertwined with the empire. He had aspired for high Roman command and later advanced against Constantinople itself. "The Visigoths will be worthy allies, coming to join their brothers in the fullness of time." "No, it's Rome, succulent, rotting Rome, that calls my special liberation." Something within her whispered, "Kill him. Kill him now. He's mine." She thought of her grandfather's rune, its image superimposed on Attila's face. Her fingers twitched to draw the inscription. Her grandfather's final legacy, a darkness that she would not understand and dare not believe in, rose within her, wanting Attila and his evil. She resisted, watching the flames on the hearth becoming the light. "What of your uncle Wergleva? Isn't he the king?" she asked in an unnaturally harsh voice. Valamir interrupted. "No more questions." "Why?" Attila asked. "Don't you trust my pledge to her?" "She doesn't understand about you and King Wergleva. She should learn to control her tongue." Helena clenched her teeth, hating Valamir for criticizing her in front of Attila, as if she were not there. Belatedly remembering Valamir's advice, she kept silent. Beyond her anger, she was disappointed. In contrast to her grandfather's mind, Valamir's intellect had its limits, born of native caution and the soldier's instinct for survival. Her grandfather, a brilliant scholar, had encouraged her to explore and stretch the boundaries of her universe, even questioning its very reality. Sometimes Attila reminded her of Belusistrem, not in appearance, but in his passion for knowledge. Though she had worshipped her grandfather, she had come to realize that his personality had ingrained flaws. He was a xenophobe, valuing only the ancient Persian culture and loathing her Thracian descent. Still, he had loved her, transcending his prejudices, and he had been a wise, even mystical guardian. Yet, in the end, he had unleashed malevolence, dark with power, in a misguided attempt to protect her. Her thoughts collapsed into bitterness as she judged herself and accepted her share of blame for Mikhail's death. If she had trusted Valamir, he would have safeguarded her son. Instead, she had gambled and lost everything. Mikhail's image danced before her. Tears stung her eyes. She faced the unthinkable. Her thirst for revenge was no different than Attila's, except in scale. Her blood called for Grilia's death. Attila's craving was for the annihilation of the empire. She met the Hun's intrusive eyes. "Tell me what clouds your face," he said. "My thoughts are my own." He laughed with raw pleasure, holding nothing back. "You see, Valamir, your wife trusts my word." Helena realized his words were true. He would not hurt her, at least not for now. She did trust him. With acrid poignancy, she wanted to turn the days back, to return to Kansbor's house, and to rely on Valamir when it mattered, when he could have saved Mikhail. Instead, she had run and lost everything. Attila had not finished. "As a favor, Helena, share your thoughts with me." She studied him with clarity and a dispassionate composure, considering whether to speak. Her words came slowly, each a reflection of her soul. "I've no right to judge you. In my own way, I'm as much a monster as you. And like you, vengeance feeds me and keeps me alive. If I could cut out Grilia's heart, I would. But for Valamir's sake, I stay my hand. Attila, you want your price in the Romans? And why? Because they hurt you. They took something precious from you." Valamir tugged at her arm, trying to stop the flow of words, but Attila held up his hand. "Tell me what you think they stole." "I don't know, Attila. But it must have been important, otherwise you wouldn't hate them with such passion." "Think," he said. "Perhaps it will come to you." Her words remained reflective. "I think they humiliated you. And you have never been humble. For your loss of dignity and for their disrespect, you cannot forgive them. I think that it would have been better for you, and me as well, if we could both find our peace. But I, for one, I am not ready to set aside my revenge. It defines me, and for now gives me strength." Attila's smile was warm. "You are seer, Helena, though you know it not. You can teach me." Acutely aware of Valamir at her side, Attila's presence filled her being, forcing all else into the background. Though she was physically repelled by the Hun, his intellect sparked her mind, crystallizing her perceptions and expanding thought. With Valamir, her heart felt alive on the threshold of love. Like her grandfather, Attila prodded her thinking into fresh, sometimes uncomfortable directions. "I'm no seer, Attila," she said, denying the quiet inner voice that had been with her for as long as she could remember, so different from the alien, reptilian feelings that followed the dark rune. When she moved in harmony with the calm sense of knowing, life flowed easily, at one with the fields and the sky. Yet it remained hard for her to listen and to have faith in her heart. Anguish coiled within her like a snake writhing with its head severed, as she realized her inner guidance had not urged flight with Mikhail. Instead, fear had been her master. Guilt overwhelmed her. She prayed with her eyes open. The inside of the tent came into sharper focus. Her breathing was quiet and deep. She heard a subtle resonance, like many voices humming. Her perceptions made no sense to her, but they were liberating and helped her to calm her turmoil. His attention redirected to Valamir. Attila discussed his plans for the return to the Danube and Ruglova's kingdom. In his voice, Helena heard longing to be home and also metallic harshness when he mentioned his uncle by name. His tone became crisp, void of emotion, as the conversation shifted to this division of spoils. Helena tried not to listen, hating the impending desecration of her grandfather's possessions. Her flash of peace dissipated, and she felt its loss with an ache in her throat. Her heart still remained open, a silent testimony to the strength of spirit. No one could sever her connection to God. Uplifted by this belief, she set aside her qualms and paid heed to the men's conversation. Attila glanced at her, his eyes seeking a breach in her defenses. As soon as he became engrossed in analyzing the merits of each war party, and left her alone. He paced the room again with deliberate strides, using the motion of his body to clarify his thinking. Finally, he stopped before Valamir. "You've asked for too little. A mare, an old stallion, a plain gold ring, a rather fine sword, and an excellent prayer word. These are nothing compared to the quality of your find." Helena frowned, annoyed at Attila's description of Pasiel, who was her only living connection to her grandfather. She loved the horse as a dear friend, not as an animal. After Mikhail's loss, her bond with the white stallion was intensified by desperation. Then she realized he had not included her as part of the spoils. Unexpectedly grateful, she raised her eyes to him. "I am pleased to bring you wealth," Valamir said with evident sincerity. Helena was proud of Valamir's lack of greed. Almost daily, Kanzor had fondled her grandfather's gold, crooning to the precious stones. Attila studied Valamir with detachment and glanced at Helena. He shook his head. "Why don't you want more? I don't understand you, Valamir. Wealth is power. If I don't give you a fair share, the men will be unhappy, thinking I cheated you. Morale will suffer, and they won't search so effectively for me next time. Then I'll be the loser." Valamir frowned. "Give me what you wish, just as long as it's light and easy to pack." Helena smiled, finding Valamir's practicality both endearing and funny. He turned to her, his blue eyes questioning, "Do you want anything else?" Feeling the strength of their connection anew, Helena wondered why it was so easy for her to become lost in his eyes. Her heart beat quickly, and she had an urge to touch his cheek. But she kept her hand at her side. Attila stopped pacing. Helena could feel his stare. As she pulled her gaze from Valamir's, exhilaration surged through her veins. Attila did not bother to mask himself. His expression was avid and fascinated as if he studied a rare creature. "May I show Valamir the better gemstones?" Helena asked, as you wish. From the small pile of stones displayed on a plain woolen cloth, she picked up a diamond. It was not overly large, but she remembered that her grandfather had been impressed with its clarity. Then she chose a specific ruby and an emerald, leaving the rest to one side. "These are worth more than all the rest. How did you know?" Attila said. His voice was barbed. "My grandfather. Each gem was to be given to a relative. These were for his brothers. Your family in Persia is large. Perhaps they are strangers to me." "Valamir, pick one of the three." Helena's rebuttal was sudden. Why shouldn't he have two? She did not care about the gems, but felt an obligation to negotiate the best trade for Valamir. Despite his lack of interest, she considered it a point of honor. Attila chuckled with pleasure and joined the barter. "And why should I give Valamir two of the three when he has married the jewel of the collection?" Blushing, Helena forced herself to persevere. "Without him, your men would have found nothing, burning the village instead." The Hun shrugged. "Perhaps we have our ways of finding things." Involuntarily she shuddered. His tone, more than his words, invoked within her tortured images of people screaming, people she had lived with for the past 5 years. Seizing the advantage, Attila continued, "Besides, Valamir has you. The reward offered for your safe return is worth far more than these baubles." "He'd have to live to collect it," Helena blurted out, cringing at the thought of him in Constantinople, being dragged away in chains, a proud lion roaring. "What fool would take you home when ransom could be easily brought to our domain?" Attila asked, his aggressive tone changing their game of barter into something else, something dangerous. His eyes were empty, expressionless, and dead. Shaken, her gratitude to him vanished. She felt cold fear. Blinking back tears, she bit her lip, unable to hide her distress. "Attila," Valamir said. The Hun breathed deeply, regaining a semblance of control. He smiled with self-deprecation. "I frightened you, Helena. It was not my intention. As an apology, Valamir may have 2 of the stones. Helena could not fathom why he cared, but her confidence in him had eroded, and her tongue was still. Valamir interrupted. No, Attila, 1 is more than enough. I could use another servant. Kratapan is not well. I need help with my horses. Let me have your red-haired Gaul. Attila was silent, then grimaced, showing his teeth in something resembling a smile. Reese is not to be trusted. He's useful with horses, but he's a firm hand. He's stubborn, willful, and only understands a whip. I cannot guarantee his behavior. I need help, and he's not afraid of Hassan. If he's more trouble than he's worth, I'll give him back. My patience with him is finished. The next time he defies me, I'll kill him. Keep him if you want, but watch your back. Take your pick of the stones. Though Helena's beauty needs no ornament, it should have its tribute. Valamir smiled. You must remember that, old friend. Few women could resist its eloquence. With a slight grin, Attila met Valamir's eyes. Helena is impervious to my charm. As she should be. May she choose the gem? Well, I don't know Valamir. She has the talent of a horse trader. Nonetheless, Attila pushed the 3 sparkling stones closer to her, his eyes lively with curiosity. Untouched by the gem's lure, Helena felt at a loss. Canswar had handled the precious jewels so often that she felt his imprint lingering, sticky with his greed. But the smaller diamond had not interested him. Oblivious to quality, he preferred the larger stones. Choose, Helena, Attila said, his eyes compounding her hesitation, making her chest tighten with desperation. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. The diamond, she said, not picking it up. You're not happy, Attila said. These things have only brought me pain. She thought of Canswar's face when he had first sorted through her grandfather's possessions. His lips pursed, almost bloated. His eyes narrowed as he had fingered each item with a sensual caress. He had never believed that anyone could have more wealth. From the beginning, he was unwilling to risk his newfound riches for the promise of a greater reward. As he placed the stones in a small pouch, Attila's expression was bland. If you don't mind, Valamir, I'll have the Thracian goldsmith make a necklace for this diamond. Memories can change, Helena. Nothing stays the same. Remember that. She did not know if his words were meant as a threat or as comfort. For once she remained quiet and unobtrusively finished her meal. Though more relaxed than before, Valamir remained watchful. Ignoring the cup of mead, he drank only from his own water flask. Both relieved and grateful, Helena edged closer to him, for her shoulder to touch his arm. The contact made her feel safe. Shortly afterward, Attila clapped his hands twice. An attendant entered and cleared the remains of the meal. Next, Attila shouted, Ishiite! The Hun lifted the tent flap, strode smoothly, and stood before his leader, waiting respectfully. Attila was curt. Have the drummer beat the gathering. Ishiite nodded before vanishing to the outside, to the open sky. In moments, Helena heard a drum, its percussion syncopated, beating 3 counts over and over. Voices shouted a sporadic cheer. All indicated that the camp had erupted into commotion. Men presented themselves to Attila for orders. He pointed to the pile of goods. Take the spoils to the ceremony. As his commands were obeyed, Valamir stood, not concealing his wish to be gone. His hand reached for Attila. His hand reached for Helena. She rose to her feet, stiff from sitting. The rug had offered minimal protection from the cold ground. Valamir, Attila said, you will ride with me. He stood across from them, taller than Helena, but not by much. Valamir loomed over both of them. The Hun's quick glance swept over them, leaving Helena chilled. Then he smiled broadly. I'm pleased that all is well between you and your bride. Her body became taut, sensing an attack. She could not anticipate Attila's next move. His maneuvering was too quick, too shrewd for her to counter. Every conversation an exercise in tactics. Trusting her instincts, she could only keep alert. It would have to be enough. Valamir was succinct. We are as we seem. Attila looked rather pointedly at Valamir's tunic, splotched with oozing blood. The Goth did not reply. Attila preceded them outside, holding the tent flap open for them to follow. He waited for Helena to pass and smiled broadly at her, suddenly pleased. His mood swings confused her. She would never understand him. Their horses pawed the ground, rested to be off. A young boy, no more than 5, streaked past her, squealing with laughter as his mother gave chase. When he almost ran into Attila's eyes, the woman's eyes grew wide. She backed away, stammering. She screamed something in Hunnic. The child stopped his game. Helena thought of Mikhail, and her face tightened as melancholy captured her heart again. So that's where we are. Chapter 20, they go to the big Hunnic gathering. So I'll see you next week. If you have any questions, you can check my Facebook page. And have a good week. Take care.